The streets of New Orleans are layered with two distinct histories. On the surface, the French Quarter presents an unbroken continuum of vibrant socio-economic activity, operating exactly as it has for generations. But sitting directly at the intersection of that modern nightlife is 1140 Royal Street, the LaLaurie Mansion. This graph tracks anomalous event reports at this specific location from 1834 to the present. Notice the massive, sustained spike in reports that never drops back to a baseline of zero. This volume of independent testimony across 190 years shifts the focus from urban legend to longitudinal data. Our objective today is twofold. We will chronologically reconstruct the documented crimes committed on this property in 1834, and then analyze the specific recurring phenomenological footprint that followed. To understand why these localized anomalies persist, we must look objectively at the extreme historical trauma that generated them. In 1832, Madame Delphine LaLaurie held immense social capital. Her uncle had served as the governor of Louisiana, and her cousin was the sitting mayor of New Orleans. That level of elite political insulation creates a highly protected environment. It naturally suppresses standard institutional oversight, allowing extreme behavior to continue unchecked. Despite the mansion serving as a public hub for high society events, neighboring residents began noting stark physical anomalies. The enslaved workers kept on the property were severely emaciated. Outside observers reported that these individuals moved with strict, unnatural caution, displaying the distinct biomechanical hesitation of people living in chronic, systemic pain. The first documented structural failure of LaLaurie's protective social barrier occurred when a 12-year-old enslaved girl fled across the mansion's roof, eventually plunging to her death in the courtyard below. This public fatality forced the city into a preliminary legal investigation, resulting in the temporary removal of the enslaved workers from the property. But this flowchart illustrates the mechanism of sociological masking. Instead of pursuing criminal charges, New Orleans High Society prioritized class solidarity, actively blocking further intervention and protecting one of their own. The authorities allowed LaLaurie to simply purchase new enslaved individuals to replace those who had been removed. The legal fiction evaporated entirely. The early abuses at the mansion were never invisible. They were observed, legally documented, and then actively facilitated by systemic institutional complicity. The catalyst event that finally shattered that complicity occurred on April 10, 1834. During a crowded party, a fire broke out in the mansion's kitchen. When first responders forced their way into the room, they found an elderly enslaved woman chained directly to the hearth. She had intentionally set the fire as a desperate suicide attempt. She told responders it was the only way to avoid being taken to the restricted zone at the top of the house. The fire crews followed her directions up a narrow, steep staircase, stopping at a heavy oak door. It was bolted from the outside, and entirely lacked an interior or exterior handle. This architectural wireframe maps out the forensic reality breached behind that door. A space outfitted with iron restraints, surgical instruments, and cages. While lower floors operated as public entertainment zones, the red attic space was isolated strictly as a restricted torture zone. Responders found 7 survivors locked inside. The physical evidence indicated severe mutilation designed to prolong physical suffering over months or years. The New Orleans E recorded specific irreversible traumas: a man who had been rendered completely mute, and an elderly woman whose limbs had been broken and left permanently paralyzed. 4 days later, city workers excavated the courtyard and made a secondary forensic discovery: multiple buried remains, including those of a child. The exposure of this undeniable physical reality immediately shattered LaLaurie's sociological masking. Within hours, a mob of 4,000 citizens descended on the property. The exposure of these crimes deserved LaLaurie's social standing in a single day, marking the transition of the property from an elite social hub to a site of intense public scrutiny. Within weeks of the fire, while the building was still completely vacant, pedestrians walking past 1140 Royal Street began reporting distinct auditory anomalies, specifically the sound of screaming from inside. This timeline plots institutional usage against reported anomalies, starting with its conversion into a girls' school in the 1850s. Here, we log our first dataset shift. Activity escalates to physical. Naive young students began reporting scratches from unseen forces. Advancing to the 1870s, the timeline shows conversion into tenement apartments for immigrant dog workers. During this period, we see high tenant abandonment. Families routinely fled the property, citing recurring phantom scratching within the walls and moaning beneath the floorboards. The dataset also includes unique commercial anomalies. A furniture dealer operating out of the ground floor found his entire inventory inexplicably stained overnight, repeatedly, with no discernible physical cause. Moving into the modern era, the data shows a chronic pattern. Intense environmental pressures repeatedly force modern owners to vacate the property. The most high-profile case study of this rapid turnover cycle is the actor Nicolas Cage, who purchased the residence in 2007. He acquired the property with the initial intent to write a horror novel inside it, but lost the house to foreclosure just 2 years later. Following his departure, Cage maintained a highly irregular, strict public silence regarding any specific experiences he had inside the house. We can view these different ownership eras, the school, the tenements, the elite private residence, as distinct demographic test groups subjected to the exact same location. Regardless of the era, the institution, or the occupant's prior historical knowledge, the site acts as an unwavering control environment, consistently generating identical phenomenological output. This matrix categorizes the specific recurring patterns reported over the 190-year timeline. We see clear clusters of auditory phenomena, like dragging chains, visual anomalies, like apparitions in upper windows, and localized physical temperature drops. These historical patterns match modern methodological findings. Contemporary investigators consistently document the exact same shadow figures and light anomalies reported a century ago. We also see independent validation from uninformed sensitives. Mediums brought to the exterior without prior knowledge routinely refuse to approach the property, citing an immediate, overwhelming influx of anomalous data. When thousands of disconnected witnesses across 2 centuries verify the exact same sensory inputs, the idea of a coordinated, multi-generational fabrication becomes a statistical impossibility. The modern anomalous dataset maps directly back to the 1834 forensic reality. Extreme, localized trauma leaves a measurable environmental footprint. The property functions as an architectural anomaly, a residence that, across dozens of owners in multiple eras, has failed to sustain continuous human occupancy. This structure remains a physical archive of the systemic violence once contained within its upper rooms.